Okay, so I see some more people trickling in, so I think we might as well get started with a more formal introduction and save everyone from hearing any more small talk. Um, so hello to everyone who is joining us. My name is Danae. I'm the communication manager at the Greene Center, and I'm joined with Joe Testani, who's our executive director, and we've been doing these AMAs or Ask Me Anythings for a few weeks now, and they've been a lot of fun, honestly. We've been really surprised by a lot of the thought and insight that's been coming out in regards to some of the questions we're getting. And we do ask that if you have questions for Joe, please use the Q&A feature that you can find by hovering on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit any questions that you have. We do have a few people on the back end. Hi, Alyssa. Hi, Jody. Thank you. Who are helping us answer these questions. So you might see Joe answer them live, or you might get a direct response from one of them, depending on the question type. So I just want to put that out there. Again, thank you for joining. And with that, Joe, did you have anything you want to say before we jump into the first question?
No, welcome everyone. And today, thanks for coordinating as usual. And I've enjoyed our weekly AMAs together.
Yeah, of course. It's been a lot of fun. And I mean, honestly, I'm learning a lot. It's been great to explore some of these topics and really dive into how COVID-19 is impacting the job market, different opportunities, and
Yep.
even the future of work, because there's so much still unknown and so
Yeah.
much is changing on the daily. So I think it's really important and I've enjoyed it too. So thanks. Okay, let's get to it.
Okay.
Question number one that I see coming in. So there's been a lot of questions about how to use summer 2020 wisely in terms of adding to their resumes, research, and pre-med experience, or even any other industry interests. So
Uh,
how do you think students can support each other during
I
this?
I think this is a great question. I think this is I think it's something that I know a lot of our advisors in the office have been working with students to figure out, those that have their experiences disrupted. I think it's been really, obviously really challenging. But I think that being said, I think it's an opportunity to demonstrate a variety of things about you as an individual. I think first and foremost, this actually could be, I know it sounds weird, but like a freeing experience and an opportunity to be really creative. I think you can look to things that you're interested in, things that might be problems that you want to solve that might be related to your academic experience, to your career interests, or maybe even personally. I think one of the big things coming out of this summer will be how you tell the story about your sort of COVID experience. And I don't mean that in a campy way or anything. I really do mean that that's going to be probably the first question most employers, graduate schools will inquire about, and they'll ask that. And I don't think there's one right answer. I think this is going to be a very personalized thing. Many students have experienced this disruption caused by COVID in so many different acute ways. I think it's going to be really important to kind of think about what this means for you. Some of your families have been really impacted negatively. Travel's been impacted. I know, my own family being on Long Island outside New York City, being significantly impacted by this. So I think that's going to be a very personal piece of the story, but what you choose to do with the time will depend a little bit on that, but also how you start to piece together different ideas. So obviously some really tactical things. You can teach yourself new things or new skills. There's a great array of online resources that exist out there for you to be able to teach yourself. Many are free right now. We're actually curating a bunch of resources that will be live probably later in May on our website. We've had our student team, as well as some others around campus, identifying really cool skill development tools that will be really helpful and relevant to different industry sectors and different career fields. So there's gonna be more to come on that. Danae's gonna be working on a communication that goes out to all students to showcase some of these new resources that we have. So that's definitely one thing we can definitely do. Another opportunity might be to find something virtual. So that might be something you create on your own with an organization that maybe you're familiar with already, but also could be with organizations that we're developing. So two examples of that, I was just on a call earlier this morning with an organization that their job or what they're built on is curating or cultivating employer leads for projects that students can do virtually. So we're piloting some things right now, but that should be live in the next couple of weeks. Students can go on there and engage with employers in a really interesting, unique way around different projects. So that's going to be really a great opportunity for us to build something like that out. The second thing we're doing actively to create more experiences for students is that we're looking to really engage alumni in this. I was on a call with alumni volunteers from all over the world yesterday from the University of Rochester, and one of my challenges to them was, if you really want to help students out, contact us to create projects or virtual internships. So that's something that we're going to be working on, and we have a number of members of our team looking to create more of those opportunities. So we're going to have a bunch of different resources and opportunities that we're cultivating and curating already. Some of that's on our website under the COVID site, and Danielle will share that in the chat. Others of that will be, I think, opportunities for you to create new experiences for yourself that might be really more attuned to some of the things that you're interested in. And I think this is a way also to connect with each other, and also kind of use the power of your groups and your networks as students. Many students are part of different student organizations, belong to different groups across campus. So this is a great time to crowdsource ideas and come together to maybe do something as a collective, or maybe just share ideas as to what you're doing and how you're spending some of that time, and maybe trying some different things out. So our advisors are ready and available to help you work through some of these ideas. And I think that there'll be other advisors as well throughout the campus community that I think are willing to brainstorm and come up with different ideas, especially people like in iZone, your undergraduate advisors, or the Greene Center. So some really great resources to take advantage of. So I hope that gets at your question today, but I wanted to kind of, this has a few different facets to it, but I hope I kind of tackled all the pieces of it.
Yeah, no, you definitely did. I think it's honestly been incredible to watch all the different resources that have been shared. And it's honestly amazing to see all these different companies who are putting their heads together, and even
Yeah,
departments across the university, and providing all these great resources. It's awesome.
yeah.
You touched on it a little bit, but I was wondering if you could expand on a little bit more how students can support each other during this career-oriented time, and like how they can support each other in their growth.
Yeah, I think on a really base, like, human level, I think it's sharing your stories with each other and talking to each other. I think finding, community with each other. I think, many of you obviously miss that. Many students miss that from being on campus, and finding that community with one another. So I think I think it's an important piece of the sort of processing of all this, and then maybe figuring out what's the way forward. I think that crowdsourcing of ideas is really key. Asking questions of each other, finding out what people are doing in the summertime, maybe some of the challenges that they're seeing because of coronavirus, and maybe that's an opportunity for students to step in and either help a nonprofit organization that's struggling to, let's say, raise money for a food bank, or thinking about organizations that might try to reopen or go back to business in the coming weeks. What will it take to get them up and running again? And how can they help? Or what does it look like to do those products or services in a virtual environment? So I think there's some really cool opportunities that students can crowdsource ideas with. And I always think that the putting people together to brainstorm and colliding of ideas and sharing of resources is the best way to create new options, but also innovate. And so I think that's going to be really important. And I think that happens all the time when we're on campus. And I don't think our virtual experience shouldn't prevent us from continuing to do that with each other.
Great, great. Thank you, Joe. We do have a question coming in. Could you please speak about or speak to graduate students that will be defending their dissertation soon? How should graduate students that were thinking about an academic job start to pivot to look toward the industry? Are there some steps to start out that they can use to prepare?
It's a great question. And Alyssa, Alyssa Clark, who's our graduate advisor in the office, she's working with graduate students in art, science, engineering, and also collaborating with some folks at other parts of the campus. I'm sure she can add some more color to this in the Q&A. But I think what I'll say is this. I think this has been a tough time for graduate students in particular, especially those PhD students that were graduating and looking to get into the academic market. Obviously, with the hiring freezes at many universities across the country, I think this is going to be a really tough market. And obviously, if you're in the market right now, you've already experienced that. I think the pivot is really interesting. And I think there are opportunities. The education sector from a private sector perspective is experiencing something different than they've had in probably a number of years with the proliferation of online education, not only in the higher ed space, but in the K through 12 space as well as the adult learner space. So there's a number of organizations that are really built off of the ed tech model of delivering educational resources or content. And I think there's going to be a space for people to be able to contribute into those areas. So if you want to work in sort of an academic adjacent industry sector, I think there's going to be opportunity. And how do you do that? Well, the first thing is that you have to convert all the things that you've done as a PhD student to translate it for industry. That means simplifying and shortening a lot of your experiences. So typically, if you're applying for an academic job, you're submitting a 10-page CV or a 20-page CV outlining all the different accomplishments, publications, so on and so forth. This requires you to look to see, how do you summarize some of those experiences in 1 or 2 pages? And this really kind of requires you to get more intimate with what those organizations are wanting. What's the problem that they're looking to solve? And how do you sort of contribute to their ability to solve that problem? How do you help them fulfill the need that they have for talent? So I almost liken it, Danae, to kind of comparing it to a research project. When you're looking at a research project, you're kind of analyzing it, you're coming up with a hypothesis, you're doing your literature review, and then you're doing your research to come up with a solution or a position on that problem that you're identifying in science or the humanities or whatever it might be. And I think those same skills can actually apply to the job search. It's understanding the sector, understanding what the needs of the company it might be, and then taking your information and synthesizing it in a way that makes sense for that audience. I think the biggest challenge I've seen for graduate students and PhD students in particular, or doctoral students, has been the challenge they have at translating for their audience and really speaking to their audiences. And I think communicating to industry like you communicate to academia is not going to work, because they're moving at different speeds. And I think they want a more simplified sort of summary of what that is. I think that's going to be the first obstacle, is thinking through, how do you take all the work that you've been doing for years and summarize or simplify it to a way that allows people to understand the value of that, the market value, so to speak, for an organization. I think thinking outside of that sector of sort of private sector, educational adjacent, I think the same thing applies if you're looking to go into industry that might not be related to academia. How does your work and what are the competencies or skills you develop as a doctoral student apply to industry sector? Is it your research ability? Is it maybe some technical knowledge you developed? Is it your writing ability, presentation? So it depends on which program you're coming from at the university. That might dictate what some of the development of skills has occurred over the course of the program that you've been in. But I think those are critical initial steps to understanding that. The last thing I'll say is network and community are critical. So tapping into our alumni, tapping into people that are part of the U of R community that might be in different sectors is going to be really helpful to leveraging and really getting some traction in organizations. But I think we have a rich community of graduate school alumni that exist within the university, within the Melior Collective, which is one of our platforms. And Danae can share the link out if you're not familiar with that, about how to join that. But I think that's going to be a really important part of that is thinking about how to connect with people and sort of get them to also help you to translate some of the knowledge you have into industry sector or to the workplace.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for sharing some more insight on that. We do have a follow-up question coming in about some of the things you were saying earlier in regards to volunteering. What would you suggest is the best way to get connected with different volunteer organizations within different communities?
Good question. I think there's a number of resources that exist online, and it depends obviously where you are geographically. But there's a number of nonprofit databases and sort of resources to use. One that comes to mind is called Idealist, IDEALIST.org. It's a resource to be able to identify nonprofit, social good-based organizations in different communities. So it's just a generic sort of way to identify organizations that might exist. So that might be an easy starting point to see what those organizations are, what they're doing, what kinds of opportunities might exist. I think the other way to look at this is to think about what are the current needs in your community and how have they been impacted negatively or positively by COVID? Is it the healthcare? Is it poverty initiative? Is it the school system? Is it the after school system? Is it food insecurities? So I think it's looking at issues that might be facing your community and then identifying organizations by doing simple searches or Google searches or networking with people in your community to identify what might be the needs of those organizations for student talent. So it could be that you could jump in and help them with administrative tasks. It could be that you jump in and actually apply your educational background to a problem that they might be facing. So maybe they don't know how to create a website. Maybe they don't know how to analyze data that they have. Maybe they don't know how to communicate and get the message out to their community base about the resources that might exist for them. So these are real problems that many of our nonprofits are facing. And obviously in a social distancing kind of environment, might be really challenging for them to solve. So I think there's some good resources for that. I think if you're meeting with any of our advisors, they can help you kind of identify what that might be locally. But I think sometimes it's just starting with the basic issues that you might have an affinity towards and that you might actually want to help and try to solve, to then jump into identifying the organizations that might be trying to solve those problems.
Sure. Yeah. I would have to imagine that so many of these opportunities are going to, like you said, vary so much on where that community is located, especially
Yeah,
with all the impacts of COVID-19 and all that's been going on. Great insight. Thank you.
yeah, no
So,
problem.
in regards to employment trends, I know this is something that we've been monitoring very closely for the last
Mhm.
couple of weeks, and we have spoken about it a bit in each AMA. But this question comes from me, and I'm curious if you've seen any updates in regards to employment trends and what might be going on in regards to that, if there's any like changes we should know about.
Sure. I think there's information trickling in. I think every week we get a little bit more insight from employers and organizations that are being impacted about their decisions about the summer, as well as full-time employment. I think in terms of the summer, many organizations are still trying to convert their summer experiences to virtual. Many are still trying to hold off on a decision until some of the social distancing guidelines are kind of evaluated. So some states are starting to relax some of these expectations around social distancing, while others, like New York, I think are going to stay a little bit more stringent on these for the time being. And also in New York State, New York City is going to be very different than other parts of New York. So Rochester might return to more lessened social distancing norms than New York City will, probably for quite some time. And so I think geographic location of organizations makes a huge difference in their ability to make some of these decisions. So I think that's still trickling in. I think some organizations recognize the importance of their talent pools for internships. So I think they're working as best they can to figure out how to save these internships. And our office is actively working with organizations to help them convert that. A number of people on my team worked with some local Rochester organizations that were probably considering canceling their internships outright. But we were able to work with them and consult with them to help them convert those to virtual experiences. So I consider that a massive win. And I think if your organization that you're interning with is thinking about this or hasn't made a decision yet, encourage them to reach out to our office because we'll help them. We don't mind working with any organization that might be considering this and trying to navigate how to do this as best as possible. So I think that's definitely one thing on the internship front. In terms of the full-time employment, some of the same things apply, but there's some flexibility with that and organizations' ability to maybe push out start dates and think about onboarding in a virtual sense. Once again, going to vary widely based on the students, based on where the organization is located, based on any other sort of factors that go into that, whether students are seeking immigration visas to be able to work and be authorized. I think what we have seen is a massive increase in the usage of our Handshake platform from employers. More and more employers, based on a recent report that Handshake provided us, are using the messaging system to reach out to students directly, because some of them are still seeking talent and also moving to more remote employment options. And what Handshake has told us is that 80% of students that fill out 3 specific areas on their profile, job type, location, and job role, the interest areas on your profile, are more likely to get connected with or communicated with by employers. So I can't stress that enough. If you're actively searching for opportunities, make sure your Handshake profile is as complete as possible, because employers are using that as a mechanism to find people that are still seeking and to backfill roles that they need. And Danae will share this in the chat, but the Handshake also released an updated list of companies that are still actively recruiting. And we're going to be getting a tool in our office shortly that allows us to find those organizations specifically looking for Rochester students. And then we'll be able to communicate that out to students specifically. The last thing I'll say here in terms of trends is that Handshake, in the same survey or research that they were doing in reaching out to students, they asked students, like, what do you need most? And most of the students said, 69% of them actually said, we really want connections and facilitated connections with employers and organizations. So Jody, who's answering some questions in the Q&A, she leads our advising efforts here at the office. And they're working diligently to actually provide students with actual connections to people and organizations. That's, I think, we're shifting how we do our work to be more responsive and to meet that need. And so it's not just go looking at in a database, but it's also thinking more critically, how do we get you connected with people that want to help and are actively helping you out? So I think that's really an important piece of the equation as well, and some of the trends we're seeing both on the employment front, but also some of the student needs front.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking at the data a little bit earlier today, actually, and I found it so interesting that the percentage of employers and their activity has gone up so significantly. And
Yeah.
I think there was the statistic that 50% of the messages that they're sending to students aren't being read. And I
Yeah.
think that's such a staggering number. And
Yeah.
so for any students out there, make sure you check your Handshake messages, because there could be a nice little nugget of an opportunity in there, and you don't want to miss out on that.
It's good advice.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to pick your brain in a little bit, actually, about employment trends. I was having a conversation yesterday with a U of R alum, and he had brought up a good point that I actually had not even thought about before, but he had mentioned that where he is out in the Bay Area, that some companies and startups were very aggressive with limiting and cutting the opportunities that they currently have by significant numbers. And so he was doing a little forecasting and thought, from his perspective, in a few months down the road, like, even though some of these opportunities are not available right now, we might see a large amount increase down the road as they realize, like, oh wait, like now we actually need to fill all these again as certain restrictions start to lift. And I was curious if you had any thoughts on that perspective.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some research out there and some people forecasting a rebound effect of sorts in certain industry sectors that they're kind of biding their time until
Mm-hmm.
can get people into the office. And I think there's just so many factors that are preventing them from doing so, right? I think they're waiting for the market to kick back up. They're waiting for social distancing to be relaxed. So I think this will vary widely today, I think, by industry sector. But I think there definitely is a, a, a group of organizations, and I think this will evolve the longer this goes, that I think will rebound and will want to hire talent. The interesting thing about this, and this is all kind of forecasting, prognostication, is that in the meantime, organizations are trying to figure out how they can move more of their work virtually. So what might happen in the future also is that organizations may have opportunities that are not only rebounded as the economy starts to sort of open up a little bit, but also might be virtual. So students that might be in class or might be back in school or the semester might kick in, they might be able to participate in some of these activities. So it's going to be a different landscape, I think, than maybe we're used to, in that things fall into neat buckets typically during the year. Like
Mm-hmm.
you go to class in the fall, you go to class in the spring, you do a summer internship. We might see start more of a blend of those when those opportunities are available, because the economy might kick into gear and they might need talent, and they can't necessarily wait for people to graduate or wait for people to get to a summer internship. So I think there's just a variety of things that could happen in certain industry sectors that I think we might see an uptick. And I think how to pay attention for this for students is to look at, where are the gaps that have been created because of COVID. So what is it kind of shown a light on as being significant issues? And we might see companies going to fill the void: access to healthcare, access to food, access to different resources that maybe have been limited because of the situation that we're in, social distancing. So I would encourage you to read a lot of current events, things like the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, or different resources that are kind of covering different industry sectors and economics, because I think that those might be leading indicators of where there might be growth space in certain areas.
Thanks, Joe. I mean, it's honestly all so fascinating. Such an interesting time to see how it's all going to play out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, when applying for jobs or internships, what do you think are some strategies for students to best tailor their resumes, especially if maybe they feel like they have limited skill sets at this time?
Yeah, I think that's always something that we work with students a lot, especially first year and sophomores. I think I've met with so many students over the years where they come in my office and be like, "Oh my God, I have nothing to offer. I've done nothing in my career thus far." What I often find is that they've done plenty, especially U of R students. And it's a matter of thinking and reframing that question and talking about a few different things. So first of all, what are you actually into? What are some of the interests that you might have in or out of the classroom? Because I think most of the students spend their time doing something. And what is that something? Is it gaming? Is it volunteering? Is it studying for certain classes or courses or subject matter? Is it being involved in the lab, whatever it might be? Or is it just spending time with friends in different student organizations? So all of those things are relevant, but I think those are important questions to ask, because those are things that you have interest in, and those are things you can speak about either in an interview or on your resume. I would also think about what you've done in high school, and because I think it might be very relevant for first and second year students still. Many students, to get into Rochester, it's not like you just went to class and you showed up at U of R because you had good grades. It's about all the things that you did. So many of you are really active in high school in a variety of organizations, athletics, whatever it might be. And so those are things that are still relevant to talk about in this current state, because it's not that long ago that you can do that. Now, if I wanted to talk about what I did in high school, less relevant because it was over a long time ago. But I think for many of you, completely relevant and worthwhile. So thinking about, what did you put in your college application? What was part of those materials? I think those are things that you could include on your resume to really highlight. And then I think at the end of the day, this is the harder question maybe is that what skills do you already have? And I think sometimes in my experience, students don't give themselves enough credit for things that they actually do really well. And it could be, I'm really good at math. It could be, I'm a really great writer. Those are relevant skills. And I think what I've asked my advisors to do is work with students to uncover and unearth those things that I think students bring to the table that are already well done. And then how do you articulate that in a resume or in an interview? So I think there's more there typically than not. And I think sometimes students don't give themselves enough credit for the things that they've accomplished to date. And our job is to help them sort of unearth that and start to build their story.
Yeah, I would even say that through this whole experience of moving all to remote and virtual things, like whether it's internships or now they're doing school online, like there's so many different skills that they're unearthing. I like that word. Thanks for using that.
No
During
problem.
this time that they probably wouldn't even think of, right? Like
Yeah.
time management is something that's huge right now, simply because not only are you now home or wherever you are virtually learning, like there's a million other factors going on in the
Yeah,
background that can be really distracting. And so there's just a lot that can be said to what they're doing right now, especially during this transition time. So yeah, I definitely think if you think you have limited skills, more often than not, you actually have a large variety of skills. So don't
agree.
feel,
And all the technology too, Danae, right? Like
yeah.
all the technology we're using right now, I think those are assets in the future. I'm not saying like just being able to turn a computer on and turn your Zoom on,
Hmm.
but if you're using Google Docs, if you're using Slack, if you're using Microsoft Teams, like there's so many different tools that I think are going to become so normalized. And I think your ability to navigate a working environment, build rapport with people virtually, those become skills that I think are going to be very relevant for the future. So I think you're spot on in that, and that this experience is also a skill building experience, just taking classes remotely, just thinking about engaging with each other remotely.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Joe. We have about 12 minutes left. So if anyone has any remaining questions, I want to do a last call so we can get those in. Okay, so let's move on. So, Joe, what do you think may be different for employers who plan to recruit in the fall?
That's a really good question. This is something that we've been giving a lot of thought to. And obviously, there's probably going to be some form of social distancing norms or policies that are going to be instituted um, come fall for most universities across the country. I know some universities have already made the decision that they're committed to being in person for the fall. But that being said, doesn't mean it's going to be a normal in person. So I think we've already started exploring different technology and different platforms that will allow us to bring students and employers together in a more virtual environment. The other thing we're thinking about is how do we bring students and employers or alumni together in smaller communities or more tight-knit groups. So nothing that's going to be 200 people in a lecture hall hearing someone speak or hearing a panel. It might be a smaller, more intimate conversations, maybe between 5 or 7 students and an alum, or it might be a sort of a different type of engagement in that way. So I think we've already started planning. We've all already started thinking through recreating the fall semester. Now, what that might mean for students is that you might be able to have more tailored and personalized experiences for yourself. So you might be able to pick and choose things and maybe have even a higher level of interaction. So there is a possible positive outcome of this. On the other side of the coin, it might require you to be doing a lot more of those activities in smaller doses, as opposed to going to one career fair and having an experience trying to talk to 20 companies. You might be distributing that time to meet with different organizations virtually or in smaller groups over the course of a couple of weeks. So I think we're factoring in the student experience in that. And if you have ideas and recommendations, please feel free to reach out to me regarding that, because we're going to be soliciting feedback from students as we recreate a more virtual recruiting employer engagement experience for students. But I think those are two big things that we're already sort of planning for and considering, because I think we recognize that the fall is going to look very different than it currently does.
Great, thank you. So, how do you think we can effectively continue to adapt to all of the changes currently being caused by COVID-19 in regards to internships?
Um, it's a good question. I think if you read anything in the news, everything talks about sort of being fluid and things that are moving and constantly moving. One of the skills that was discussed at an alumni panel that I moderated last week, Danae was on that, and that's going to be alive next week or so, right, Danae?
Yep, it's up on our YouTube. I can share the link in the chat.
Awesome. Perfect. So we interviewed some alumni from 2008, 2009, and gosh, they gave such great advice and insights. And one of the things they talked about was having perseverance and adaptability. And I think the reality is that as things are happening, are you waiting to see where it's going to settle, or are you kind of flexing to what those changes are going to be? We know it can be disrupted, but there's not, unlike other times, other disruptions that might occur, there's no end point for what this might be. So I think the key thing here is that you're constantly being asked to sort of adapt and readapt and kind of be flexible to the situation. So I think the important thing here is that you're continuing to move forward. You're not waiting for things to happen. You're doing outreach to organizations and employers. You're doing outreach to alumni to network with them. You're doing outreach to create opportunities for yourself, or taking advantage of some of the resources that we're building out at the Greene Center. I think if you're constantly moving forward and working with others and staying connected, I think those are the critical things. Acknowledging the fact that there has to be some downtime to, for lack of a better term, mourn some of these changes and how it might be impacting you personally. I think that's very relevant, in each of the things that we're talking about on these AMAs, I think are always hyper personalized for you. You have to kind of see what fits and what really makes sense for you, and also resonates with your personality and your family situation and a variety of other things. But I think it's really, really important to continue to think about and move forward, because I think there are opportunities. I think the students that are trying things out and making efforts to just try, I think they're going to be ones that are rewarded. And I think those, once again, that becomes part of your story that you're able to talk about in the summer. There's going to be rejection. There's going to be sort of dead ends. But I think it's really important to continue to put effort in that. And over the next month or so, I think we're going to see a real shift, because I think there's things that are going to be sort of evolving regarding the economy, regarding healthcare, regarding, I think, the state of different geographic locations opening up or not opening up because of COVID. And I think that's something that you have to pay attention to, but we also can't wait for things to settle, because I think the reality, the likelihood of that is probably not going to be for some time.
Absolutely. So, what are some specific strategies for international students who are applying for internships right now?
I think all of the same things apply that we've talked about today, and the resources on our website and everything else like that. I think they're all still relevant. I think the big difference for international students is being in lockstep with ISO, International Student Office, and understanding what any implications are regarding CPT or OPT. So it depends, obviously, if you're an undergrad or graduate student, if you're graduating or not. There's a lot of those factors to work into it. But for those looking for internship opportunities, it's making sure you understand what the policies are as it pertains to your specific case around some of these stipulations and regulations. I think that's an important starting point, is making sure you're well versed in at least talking to your ISO advisor to help you navigate some of these things. Otherwise, I think a lot of what we've talked about is still relevant. How do you connect with the network? Are you actively pursuing opportunities? Are you out doing outreach to companies? Within Handshake, you can sort by work authorization. So there's stipulations for that. But how it plays into your OPT or CPT is very specific. And I think it's important that you work with an ISO advisor to understand what the implications are.
Great. Thank you, Joe. So
Oh,
that was the last question that came in. So I want to just take a moment to thank everyone who tuned in today. As always, Joe, great insight. Thank you for sharing from your perspective. So
thanks, man.
helpful.
Thank you.
Of course. So, for anyone listening, I want to remind you that these AMAs are recorded and they will go live on our website and YouTube, usually a couple days afterwards. So, you can find that on our website, which I did put in the chat. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to hear any feedback and even some topics that you think would be interesting to carry on over into our next AMA, which will be next Wednesday. Same place, same time. We'll be here and ready to chat.
Thanks,
All
Dave,
right.
for everything, and hope everybody was found this helpful this week, and stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Bye, everyone.